Okay. Well, it's great. It's great to see and hear all of you. And Christine, it's a little daunting to give this in your presence, so you'll have to jump in if you've got things to add to this. But this is one of our favorite topics, the culture of philanthropy, development, and fundraising. So, Lauren, do you want to take it over from there?
Okay. Well, we're going to try and build this presentation today around really three concepts. First is the idea of developing a culture of philanthropy around an institution. The second is the concept of development, which we will introduce as an idea that is transformational, and fundraising, which is more of a transactional idea. This is the fourth and last of the 6 seminars that are a part of the strategic organizational leadership track of the program. You may recall we've talked innovation, we've talked finance, we've talked enrollment, and today we're talking philanthropy. So we're going to get at 4 questions. What is a culture of philanthropy? What are the characteristics of a culture of philanthropy? How do we build such a culture? And then we're going to wind up with a conversation about the difference between development and fundraising. And so Mary Ann's going to lead off now on culture, the first of those questions. Mary Ann?
Well, we're all coming from different places right now, heavy mornings, dealing with weather, all of those things. So I want you to take a couple of minutes with me and breathe into this meditation on transformation by John O'Donohue. Real presence is the ideal of all true individuation. When we yield to helplessness, we strengthen the hand of those who would destroy. When we choose indifference, we betray our world. Yet the world is not decided by action alone. It is decided more by consciousness and spirit. They are the secret sources of all action and behavior. The spirit of a time is an incredibly subtle yet hugely powerful force, and it comprises the mentality and spirit of all individuals together. Therefore, the way you look at things is not simply a private matter. Your outlook actually and concretely affects what goes on. When you give in to helplessness, you collude with despair and add to it. When you take back your power and choose to see the possibilities for healing and transformation, your creativity awakens and flows to become an active force of renewal and encouragement in the world. In this way, even in your own hidden life, you can become a powerful agent of transformation in a broken, darkened world. There is a huge force field that, when attention focuses and directs itself toward transformation. So there's a piece, Transformation, that's a piece by John O'Donohue that really gets at what is culture. And I think we're going to spend a few minutes talking about culture, and then also having a chance to work in small groups about culture, because it really is fundamental to this idea of transformation and also this idea of philanthropy. So Tom, if you go to the next slide. Mitroff, Mason, and Pearson in The Radical Redesign of American Business, which is just a really excellent book, says that most cultures are implicit, understood but not spoken, residing in the language and the habits of interaction between people. So think about your campuses, think about your communities. What are the implicit, understood but not spoken habits of interaction between people? And then the next slide, Tom.
Okay.
The set of rarely articulated, largely unconscious, taken for granted beliefs, values, norms, and judgmental assumptions the organization makes about itself, the nature of its people in general, and its environment. Organizational culture consists of unwritten rules that govern acceptable behavior within and even outside of the organization. Really important understanding when we're talking about cultures of philanthropy. So if you take me to the next slide.
Whoops, sorry. I'm going backwards. There you go.
So philanthropic culture, and as you know from last summer, I love words, you know. Philos means loving. The anthropos is human beings, and philanthropic culture is love of humanity in the sense of caring, nourishing, developing, enhancing what it means to be human. So when we come together for that and talk about this, remember to go back to the core that this is about a love of humanity, what it means to be human. So next. Okay, so this is an exercise we're going to do at the start to get us functioning in our group again. What are your institutions' beliefs, norms, and values about philanthropic culture? And philanthropic culture includes all these things and maybe some other things, but volunteering, development, fundraising, alumni, vocation, donation, board of trustees, and then, yes, that two little dollar signs up there, which are huge. What are your institutional beliefs, norms, and values about money? And the second question is, what are your personal beliefs, norms, and values about those things, including money? So we're going to, by the grace of wonderful Zoom, we're going to split up into groups and take about 10 minutes and talk about these two beliefs. Your institution's beliefs and also your personal beliefs.
So I will set this up to begin now. In about 9 minutes, you'll get a warning that we're going to come back to the large group. So, and it will randomly assort the people between rooms. So that will begin now.
Was that people are assigned jobs within it. Like it's somehow not all of our responsibilities to do these things to develop that culture, that I'm only given one piece of it. So if I'm a faculty member, I only do the teaching piece, but someone else raises the funds and someone else does that. And that for me raised a question about whether we should be breaking it down, you know, break down some of those barriers. Although faculty always think, how could I take on more? And I think probably every person always thinks, how could I take on more? And would we, you know, I don't know if there's another way to structure it that would make sense for most people.
Hi there, Tom. How are you?
Hey, I just jumped in because I'm fascinated. I'm going to go between these ones, but
I'm glad you did. And we're just getting caught up. I joined late, and so Lissa was filling me in a bit.
But Lissa joined late also. So, you know, this is the blind leading the blind.
So here were the questions to talk about at your institution, its beliefs, norms, and the whole context of this is culture, and within that, what does it mean to have a philanthropic culture? And did you catch the piece? I love this. When you look at the Greek underlying philanthropic, it's about loving humans.
Yes,
So I
yes.
got that part. Yeah.
So the question is, within your institution, what are the institutional beliefs, norms, and values about development, fundraising, trustees, alumni, donations, vocation, volunteering, and then what are your personal beliefs about it? So first sort of institutional and then personal belief about those things.
Good. And Lisa, I like what you were saying about how sometimes when we just break up certain responsibilities that we miss out on the holistic development of the culture in the name of kind of efficiency or what might be most effective. Like you said, many people are asking, how can I take on one more thing? And so we divide and conquer, but that doesn't really necessarily draw out those holistic ideas of our culture and how we're caring well for people.
Yeah, to me, it makes it more like it's a job, and I'm not part of that larger culture in a sense. I might say we have the culture because I can look around and see people doing these things, but I'm not necessarily tasked with doing many of them.
Right.
And that bothers me a little bit. So you caught that. You did a great job of summarizing what I was trying to say there.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot here is us really nurturing trust as a part of our culture.
Oh, that's
So
good. Yeah.
I think in the opposite way, a lot of people want to be a part of everything, not from necessarily a good place, but because they just don't want to miss out on the information or the decision making.
Yeah.
You know, Tom's kind of strategy chart of like what's going on, who needs to be involved, and kind of following that logic tree. Did I get cut off?
No, you're good.
Okay. Something's going on with my computer. So the idea of saying who needs to be involved and when do they need to be involved is kind of helpful. The thing is, you know, faculty want to be involved amongst the decisions of all of the committees that are working. Faculty want to be involved with all the decisions that administration is making. Faculty want to be involved with anything that the board might be deciding. And so, it's from a place of, well, I wouldn't say all faculty, right? But there's a handful, and it comes from a place of defense rather than from a place of really trying to nurture that philanthropic culture.
You know, it's interesting. And looking at it from the other, think about, I mean, we need to understand those two questions about institutional belief. But think about from your personal side, if you were supporting an institution, how is this going to matter to you? And from our personal perspective, when we support an institution, whatever kind of thing it is, nonprofit, it's really about consistency of values, you know, and it's a mission that we believe is really, really important. Right. And let's get to yours. It's not about engaging with the fundraising apparatus of whatever that institution is. Right. You know, we want to know about students or people that are being helped, right?
Yeah.
So I think it helps to think about this from both sides, you know, and imagine yourself as a supporter. How would you, what do you need to know?
That's a great question, because it does make me think differently, because I think about causes or groups that I do support, and I do want to know their values. I do want to see how that plays out, what they actually, not just what they say, but just, you know, tell me how this manifests itself in your actions and in the projects you take on, and, you know, what you choose to do or choose not to do. Those are important questions for me as a supporter.
Yep.
And I think even as an employee. So if I'm thinking of going to any university and, you know, that it's a two-way street in the hiring, who do I want to commit to? Those are the things I want to know. You know, I want to know beyond teaching load and, you know, the dollars I'll be paid. I would be miserable even with a light teaching load and a lot of money if I hated the place or felt that the values were out of sync or whatever. That, you know, that would only be a small little honeymoon period there.
Right.
Yeah. It is interesting from that. And it's really how does and Eric, you've seen me, this emanates from whoever the leader is.
Right.
and where their values and how they talk about things, down to the advancement people, down to the faculty and staff, and down to the students. So, hey, I got to go drop in on another couple. This is like so cool. I'm having fun with Zoom. So I'll see
That
you
is
guys.
cool. Yeah.
I'll see you guys in a little bit.
Okay.
All right.
If someone's willing or excited to support you in this way that's meaningful to them, you know, without sacrificing your mission or your values, you got to find a way to make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, I just thought I'd drop in. I'm having a cool time hanging around in Zoom. So.
Hey, you're like a peeping Tom. What is that?
Oh, well, I should have kept my video off. Darn.
Yeah.
Hey, interesting discussion. Another group is, one way to really understand this is put yourself in the place of being a supporter. And what would your expectations be on the other side? You know, why are you going to support a particular organization? And because if it rings bells with you, you can understand better how it might or might not ring somebody else's bell.
Right.
Yeah, we kind of chatted about, in a way, we kind of chatted about that without, I guess, directly asking that question to one another. But we talked about the significance of really understanding who you are as an institution first and foremost, and being able to, and also being able to understand the vision of your institution, right, where it is you're going, and remaining true to yourself, and that building that culture of philanthropy really is something that is not only is it an external, but it's an internal. And your own constituents, your own direct community members need to be confident and assured of why they're doing what they're doing, and they need to be able to feel that, you know, they're giving back to the institution. That, you know, even though they're earning a paycheck, but if you're there, if you truly feel that. As an example, whenever I introduce myself to groups of people, I don't introduce myself as I work for. I always say that I serve Concordia University.
Yeah.
And because that's the way that I look at it. And I think that when, just as an institution, when you're confident in who you are, and people who come on board to work for you, and they can align their passions with the mission of the institution and find how they can help perpetuate the mission of the institution, then I think you start to develop that culture. And then I think the folks external to the institution, how do you get their time, their interests, their energies, their connections, and ultimately their dollars? I think you've got to appeal to the human spirit. You've got to appeal to, Adam said it a second ago, people aren't too interested in giving money to pay down bills.
Yeah, and that's Mary Ann's point about the culture is loving human beings. I got to go. We're going to close out here in a couple minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, shoot. No. Oh, shoot. Can you put me back?
I can't. Were you in the middle of something? It's gradually closing.
Yes, and I accidentally pushed the button and it put me back.
Oh, don't worry. You can jump in as everybody gets here.
Oh, Merritt.
Yes.
Sorry. I pushed the button and I switched back over.
Totally fine.
Hey, Katie, we need your decision on rooms.
Oh, whatever's easiest.
No. I can't do that. You have to actually call them.
Okay, I'll call.
And pass on either your credit card or cancel it.
Okay, I'll do that today.
Okay, thanks.
I'm going to have another thing I got to do.
We're out.
Hey, we're back, Mary Ann. I'm going back and putting the slide back up. And hopefully this time I'll get the slides moving in the correct direction.
It's all good, Tom. It's all good. So I'm going to encourage you to hang on to those conversations, to those ideas, to those expressions, both the implicit ones and the explicit ones, because they'll have great bearing as we talk about developing cultures of philanthropy. So at this point, I'll turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Lauren.
Thank you. I just did a wonderful group session with Sonia from Augsburg, and we were talking about the dramatic changes we've really seen in a number of beliefs, norms, and values. Given Augsburg's recent successes in development work and the major gifts in the building of a huge, wonderful, wonderful new building, and how it has impacted the beliefs, norms, and values as is focused on philanthropy and development. And that was a very, thank you, Sonia, for a very good conversation. I wonder if you go to the next slide. This slide attempts to pull together some of what we believe are the characteristics of a culture of philanthropy in an institution. One is that people in the institution act as ambassadors and engage in the relationship building that's so essential. Sometimes development work is closeted over in the corner of the campus. It's disrespected. People want to stay away from it as far as possible. That's not the case in an institution that is marked by a culture of philanthropy. Indeed, development is understood and valued as mission-aligned part of the organization. That it's a part of carrying out the work we do. I think you can think about that in a number of ways. One of the ways I think about it is that I believe that philanthropy has as much impact on donors as it does on those who receive the donations. And it is indeed mission aligned if we think of ourselves as educational institutions devoted to human growth and flourishing. Third point on this is that everyone in the organization is able to articulate a case for giving. And giving becomes infectious. People see it as proper, as a normal way to think about your relationship with the institution, and they're at ease talking about why people do it. Fourth, impact stories are told and shared throughout the institution and broader constituencies. Philanthropy lives in the stories of the individuals, and it's used to have so much fun talking to people, particularly humble donors who didn't want their name to be associated, until one could visit with them about the fact that if we could share their story, it might impact others. And that was usually a door opener in terms of people saying, okay, you can tell others my story if you think it will be helpful. If they could see it was about helping the institution and not about themselves, they were fine with the stories. And then fifth, not surprisingly, it all comes back to leadership. Leadership, president, cabinet, board, understand they're committed, they're personally invested, and they're financially supportive. I started out my administration in a context of an organization that, in a college where the board chair proudly said that we're really not concerned about how much the board gives, because we're on the board because we care about the institution, and we have we know we're smart and we can make contributions to running the institution. And so we don't need to stoop so low as to think about financial investments in the institution. That's a kind of secondary currency. Nothing could be further from the truth, in my opinion. We were, Sonia was just sharing that the major gifts that Augsburg have received have, in her conversations, revealed their impact on members of the board who have seen now their responsibility and their opportunity to lead philanthropically at a new level on behalf of the college. Okay, so building and supporting a culture of philanthropy is the next topic. Let me run quickly through that.
Whoops, sorry. There you go.
There we are. Ongoing focus on mission planning campaign are all connected at the leadership level. President, institutional leadership board are clear and personally invested. One of the great benefits of these campaigns that everybody runs is it gives you a choice it gives you an opportunity to tell the story. It sets up a platform. People expect you to and understand why you're talking philanthropy, why you're talking development, why you're talking about the institution's story. We already said, number 2, development is thus understood and viewed and valued as an mission-aligned part of the institution. It includes supporting and reinforcing everyone's role as an ambassador of the place, sharing and knowing the philanthropic stories, and then developing and understanding and valuing ultimately a culture that is permeated with the notions of philanthropy. We were talking about the fact that one of the most important ways to move an institution along in terms of people's understanding and acceptance of this idea of a culture of philanthropy is in fact success. People see what major investments in the institution do and what they accomplish, and suddenly development work is respected, and donors are seen in a new light as important, and the culture of the institution changes. Got a graph here that we tried to summarize this. You know that your handy-dandy fellows program instructors love little charts and circles. And so we have talked here about the culture of the institution. You may remember we talked about that back at the opening retreat, and the idea that culture eats strategy, and that one part of strategic organizational leadership is that incredibly important capacity to read, intuit, understand, and act in accordance with the culture of the institution. The culture of philanthropy, the beliefs, norms, and values about philanthropy are a part of that culture. And they both surround the work of development, which is relational and transformative, and fundraising, which is transactional. And Mary Ann's going to talk particularly about those two inner circles and the distinction between the two. Mary Ann? Turn on your mic.
Sorry. Okay, so Tom, if you go to the next slide.
Okay.
This really is one of my favorite conversations to have with people in higher ed and in the nonprofit world in general. We talk about fundraising and development, and you'll hear people use those terms interchangeably. And I do not think they are interchangeable. In fact, if I could wave a magic wand, I would really work with people both on development, professional development staffs, and also with the culture of philanthropy, because I think they're really importantly different. And here you'll see that development is relational. It's about the long term. It's developing relationships over time. It really speaks to what Lauren was talking about with this culture of philanthropy, where everyone understands that they're a part of the whole, that the stories are generated both from student, through the hierarchy of the institution, faculty, staff, administration, board, and also generated from the board to the administration, to the faculty, to the staff, to the students. And that's really a very elastic and very important transformational place of story and engagement. Fundraising is transactional. It's the short term, it's the annual, it's the we're going to call you for your annual fund gift. While that's an important part of the culture of philanthropy, it's very much different than the development part. And I think it's really important to understand and also grapple with the differences on what those mean. So if you go to the next slide, Tom, it illustrates this a little bit more. And this is maybe for some of you who've worked with me this year in coaching, we've talked about polarities, the both and not the either or. So I think, again, back to Lauren's charts are us about the culture of philanthropy. Fundraising is a part of the whole. But fundraising is related to these metrics where we'll look at attrition rate, we'll look at cost per dollar raised, we'll look at average lifetime value, we'll look at renewals, number of event attendees, response rates, percentage of board giving, email open rates, upgrades, downgrades, number of face-to-face solicitations, email click-through rates, net ticket revenue. All important parts of understanding it at a transactional level. But hopefully where the metrics go is to move to motives in a more philanthropic or transformational type of environment, where attendance at mission relevant programs and events becomes part of the culture of the community on campus, where faculty, students, staff actually do attend and are a part of the whole there. Increases the connection between donor and the work that's being done on campus. And we will tell a couple of stories at the end about how important this is, not just connecting the development person with the donor, but how does it connect students and faculty, the important work and lifeblood of the institution, with the donor, and how those relationships provide some of the transformational basis for a culture of philanthropy. Donor and employee satisfaction, both very important parts of understanding culture. Mission moments for staff, board, and donors, how important it is to share these stories at all levels. And I would say in that we've got to work on this, because one of the things that we forget there is students. We've got our best donors in our own backyard for 4, sometimes 5 years. We're embedding these stories, sharing them within the student culture, helping students to understand the investments that are made, particularly in our places of private, mission-oriented, higher ed, are absolutely crucial. And crucial for students to understand these just aren't wealthy people wanting to make an investment or impact on the institution, but usually they're filled with all kinds of stories and ways to connect and make that enriching for students as well. And then institutional leadership is personally vested. So again, the metrics are important in this. The fundraising, the transactional pieces are important, but moving to that transformational and philanthropic culture opens up the broad sense of possibility. And I think that's part of what John O'Donohue was talking about in the meditation, about increasing the horizons and the potential that this has for our institutions to move from scarcity, places of scarcity, to places of abundance.
We thought we'd wrap up today with just sharing a couple of illustrations and maybe then save about 15 minutes for conversation and questions around these subjects. One of the people who saved PLU coming out of World War II and up through the transformational years for so many of our institutions as they welcomed the vets and then became really truly modern universities in the 60s. Was a man by the name of Seth Eastfold, and he's known for traveling the roads of eastern Washington, going from farm to farm, raising the money that kept PLU in business in those years, and building the relationships. And he stopped at a farm in eastern Washington and met a young woman by the name of Karen Hilly, who at the time was 10 years old. And in listening to him talk to her father, she resolved that she would go to Pacific Lutheran University, which 8 years later she did, and she became a nurse. She admitted the first patient ever to the University of Washington Hospital when it opened, and spent her life there working as a nurse. She was a loyal Lute, as we called her, and so made a contribution every year, and basically at the $1,000 level. Late in her life, she married a physician that she had known and worked with for 30 years. And they were married only a short period of time when he became ill and passed. She came to campus one day to the dedication of the organ in our new music building, and commented to one of our development officers, who she had actually attended school with at PLU in the 50s, and said, I think you should come by because I need to make a memorial in honor of my husband, a memorial gift. And he went and saw her, and she wrote a check for $100,000 in memory of her husband. Needless to say, this began a new relationship that involved us as the institution's leaders. It started to involve students, as we would send them up and pick her up and bring her to campus for events, and she loved that, and she loved the students. And 18 months later, she made a pledge of $12 million to our current campaign. Some 3 years after that, she said, well, that $12 million pledge, that was half of our estate. I think I'll just give the whole estate to PLU. The sad part is that it was just a few years later when she came down with Lou Gehrig's disease, and it took her in less than a year. And she left us what turned out to be something in a range of $27 or $28 million. And so there was a building on our campus called Eastfold Hall, which now contains Eastfold Auditorium, which is a part of the Karen Hilly Phillips Center for the Performing Arts at PLU. And that journey from $1,000 to a year to 27 million is an incredible story of development, how she grew with the institution, saw what she could do. Knowing the students was crucial. She came onto our board of trustees and saw what the institution was doing. That became another key dimension of it. When she had first made her $12 million pledge, it was anonymous. She didn't want anyone to know she had those kinds of resources. And we were at a couple of large public events where we had received an anonymous $12 million gift, and she would stand up and clap for herself. It was really quite amazing to watch her do that. Each of us and each of our institutions have stories like that. And we tell that story not to brag about what we did, but simply to illustrate some of the principles we're talking about today. And he has forever She has forever marked PLU because PLU is now an institution that when other donors look at it, it is worth an investment of $25 million. Go ahead, Marianne.
Well, and just a couple of things I want to add. You know, she was a transactional donor. She responded to the fundraising calls up until that time. You know, the culture of philanthropy, that there were development people who actually did attend events on campus and were a part of the crowd, getting to know the people. That's, again, a part of the story. And the part of the story that I love so much is that she waded into the culture of students. The students waded into a relationship with her. That didn't happen just magically. We had a group of students in the president's office that we felt it was important to tell the real stories about campus. The donors were interested in hearing those stories, and while Lauren's a great storyteller, I'm a good storyteller. The magic comes when students have a chance to tell some of these stories in their own words. How powerful that was with Karen. And there were an entire generation of students on that campus who knew Karen, who knew of her story, knew of her more than just the lady with all the money. She was a real person to them. The same with faculty. I mean, we knew certain areas. Karen was very interested in the environment. She was very interested in agriculture, biology. Putting her together with some of those faculty, when she would sit in some of their classes, when she would be on campus, that she would be able to have lunch with them and conversation about them as to the things that were important. Those were the things that really solidified her investment in the institution. And I think both in the president's office and the development office that I was a part of during those times, we really saw ourselves more as door openers and in fact putting these people together, which created just such a incredibly rich environment. And I had an experience yesterday with one of the former students who had picked Karen up a lot to bring her to campus to events and gotten to know her very well over the years. And he's now a young man. He's 32. He's had his own startup company in Missoula, Montana. And he's in the process of selling his company. He's in the process of looking for a development job because he said that interaction, as I look back on it, really called me forward to think hard about the ways in which I want to live out my life. So the story goes on, and she would be extremely pleased about that.
Time for conversation and discussion. Christine, you can correct us.
Add to it.
Christine, check, you may be muted.
There.
I loved hearing that story. I hadn't heard of that story, but what a wonderful story. And it's all in the leadership and the sharing of stories that is so important. So thanks for sharing that. And fortunately, yes, we do all have our own stories to share. And that's why I love this work, right? So yeah, it's such a wonderful vocation.
Thank you.
So Christine, what role should faculty play in development work?
They should definitely be a partner in developing those relationships. You know, as Marianne mentioned, you know, including faculty in lunches, visits, working with your development team in cultivating donors who may be interested in your area of work. You're the experts, and so we bring you in to provide the expertise. We're not the experts in your area, so we're kind of the liaison between you and the donor, and that's how you can develop that relationship and strengthen that relationship. Yeah, you're key.
Sonia and I talked about the fact that one of the stereotypes, one of the sets of norms and beliefs and values that we carry on our campuses are who are these donors and what are they up to? You know, and there's a real tendency. I mean, there's such benefit from that kind of synergy, because not only do the donors get to know the faculty, but faculty and staff and students get to know the donors and discover these are not people with horns on their head. You know, these are not narrow-minded people who want to dictate what the institution is going to do or teach or believe. These are really people who are looking for a cause to invest their life in. And being wealthy is a mixed blessing. And there are a lot of wealthy people who are looking for a higher purpose and calling. And we can, by introducing them to what's happening in our institutions, introduce them to causes that are more significant, more continuous, more long living than they themselves are. And that's what they're looking for.
I have a question, and I'm not sure who to direct it to, but what do you do when individuals have become disgruntled with the institution? How do you bring them back on board to support? For example, we went through a name change 2 years ago from Crusaders to Riverhawk. And we have lost many Crusaders who now refuse to donate because they feel like their identity has been stamped out, their connection to the university. So it's been a challenge for us the last 2 years to connect with probably our most wealthiest donors who were Crusaders. Suggestions for that particular problem?
Anybody else? But
Go ahead.
I would keep working on that relationship, because maybe that eventually they'll come around. We have that situation where we had a donor who got upset with us, and our vice president just kept at it and kept calling and kept the relationship going as much as you possibly can. I mean, there are going to be folks who are just going to, not be responsive. For those, you keep trying, you keep working at it, you don't give up, and eventually they'll come around. This person eventually came back and left us their bequest, their estate. But that was only because of that continued effort. So you can't really give up. There's a lot of times I want to give up, but then you just have to keep at it, and it's amazing. But, keeping at it, people will turn around.
And I think, to build on what Christine said, it's to listen, right? To have places where, they're invited in to listen, as painful as it can be. But where they have a chance to feel like they're heard. I mean, I think sometimes in those big change situations, often people don't feel like they've had a chance to be heard. Sometimes just feeling like they're heard. And then going back to the power of these stories. What's happening with student athletes at the institutions? It might be under another name, but you can touch it, you can feel it. That's the emotional part of the thing. So keeping those contact lines open. And then also, I just really add, it needs some painful, present listening to their concerns.
Well, and I think one of the things is if people usually express their anger by, I'm not going to give you any money. And one of the keys to rebuilding the relationship is if you can find a way to establish a relationship that doesn't have anything to do with their money. If you can say to them, I'd like to talk to you, and I don't want to talk to you about your giving your money because I know you're upset about the name change. But I do have a couple of areas of work in which you could be really helpful to me. And I'd like to talk with you about those, because if you can build a positive bridge, maybe it's coming and talking to the group about how they trained, or maybe it's talking to the group about how they can think about their career development, or some aspect where an alum can contribute besides writing in a check, for example. that may get them re-engaged and get them thinking about the positive dimensions of things, as opposed to the one thing that's saying, okay, I don't like that, and I don't like it enough, so it's going to keep my pen from writing a check. Yeah.
And that's a perfect example of this development philosophy rather than the fundraising philosophy. It's longer term, it's more transformational, it has much, much more to do about relationship than it does about the actual money transaction.
Jerry, I was thinking along those lines also, but also thinking about incorporating both terms. So establishing a program such as Crusaders Developing Riverhawks, and then linking, someone who was a Crusader with a Riverhawk along the line of whatever area of development you want them to help with. Again, not about the money, but that relationship, but using their name too, so that they see it again. I even envision sweatshirts, Crusaders to Riverhawks, or something that bring it all together, and they can see themselves as both who they were and part of the new identity too. I don't know if it would work or not, but it might make them feel like it's still their place there.
Hey, Jerry, Tom, we ran into the same thing when we moved to campus, right? So we're not talking about a name change. We're talking about it not existing anymore.
Right.
And one of the things that we did a lot of was to say, here are the things that haven't changed. Come talk to these students, see this place. And, oh, by the way, the roof doesn't leak anymore. And, there's not 15 lanes of traffic. So that gets back to what Lauren and Marianne and Christine and listen, it's about things other than the physical presence. Now, here's the bad news is, to be honest, there's some you're not going to change.
Sure.
And that's okay too, at various engagement levels and things. So, but we eventually got a substantial number moved.
Thanks.
Just a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek approach, but we used to say that when we launched our major campaigns, that if we could give everyone in the Pacific Lutheran University family with whom we had a relationship an opportunity to say no, chances are the campaign would succeed because enough people would say yes. I just think that it bears in part on Tom's point that, giving money is not the way a lot of people are going to express their relationship and care about the institution, and indeed it isn't the only way. Yeah. There are other ways to do it, and that can be helpful. Others? Good question. Wow.
What we've tried to do a little bit more lately over here in Chicago, we've got a pretty sharp guy down in our foundation area, and what we've tried to do is bring in individuals who care about the institution, but maybe they're not in a position to be able to financially contribute yet. I mean, they have the capacity to. It's just, do they have the willingness to do that? But we've been bringing them in and trying to pick their brains, utilize their expertise, and have them look over potential strategies, strategic plans, what have you, and have them really kind of feel as if they're part of the front end development of a campaign, a minor campaign, or something like that. Yeah. And so some ownership on the front end, some fingerprints on it in the front end has seemed to be well received more recently.
That's magic strategy, right? That's looking at the long game, and it's a win-win. That's win-win, both for the donor and for the institution. Wow. That's a really powerful example.
I think one of the real challenges in this day and age is how we organize and go about our alumni work, because we're graduating a generation of students, many of whom's primary financial obligation is their student loans and getting started in life. And we start asking in the year after they graduate to give us money. And it's the one thing they're really not in position to do. But if we can ask our young grads to do other things, to mentor current students, to open the doors with their employers, to host events when we're in the territory, to be admissions ambassadors. All of these things allow the opportunity to develop a relationship without, I sometimes think, we give our young alums practice in saying no to us because we say, give us the farm when they don't have a farm to give us. And then by the time they tell us no for 20 years in a row, they're pretty good at telling us no, and it's hard to turn them to saying yes. So if we can ask people at whatever stage of the development of the relationship with them, a request that they can say yes to, how that over time develops a different kind of connection.
I remember, I think Concordia has something called a C400. Obviously, you're well aware of that. But I can remember as a young alum, there was something, I couldn't afford whatever that was, right? But I knew it had been important to my family, and you see people wearing the C400 thing on their shirt. But there was some program where it was divided over 3 years. And so it was a more doable dollar amount for young alumni. And I remember thinking that's brilliant, right? Because you get recognized, you still feel like you're part of this community of sharing, of resources. You probably came up with it, Lauren and Marianne. Who knows?
No, we didn't. But, that too, that's a really interesting example, Sonia, because it was a highly visible program, both on campus. I remember being a student and thinking about all these wealthy people that would come to campus once a month back in those days for a meeting, and feeling like, wow, that's a really incredible investment. And I was one of those young alums who took advantage of that 3-year program, right? Because it was a way of being connected with that larger community. But I think being more creative, it was, the beginning of my development relationship with the institution.
Okay.
Anything else? Fundraising development. Anybody have any reaction to that? Please don't use them interchangeably.
Well, we've got 2 presidents here, former presidents. So what percentage of a president's time should be spent on fundraising?
100%.
A development, you mean? It should be spent on.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to go the other way there, Jeff. Exactly. No. We can do the fundraising. That's what we hire people to do. It's all about development. And philanthropy.
Not selling raffle tickets, development.
Yeah.
That's really, that's one of those, in some ways, unanswerable question. I always discovered it was as much time as you could devote to it amongst all of the things that compete for your time in the presidential chair. It obviously depends on what your aptitudes and interests are as a president. And, I came into the presidency out of a career doing development work. So, and Marianne has had a development background. So it was one of the things that we could contribute in a distinctive way to an institution that didn't have much of a culture of philanthropy. And so it was very high on our priority list for 20 years. Other presidents who don't have that background and may have less interest and aptitude devote less time to it. But it's hard to advance an institution without those resources. And so I said, anytime I was not out telling the story or working to find a prospective student or doing something that was going to advance the revenue streams, I was overhead. So you try and limit your overhead time.
Right.
Jeff, and I think you'll see presidents that do a whole variety of models.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's the outside president and the inside provost. And sometimes There's a president that's inside a lot. I think the problem is when we look at development, it certainly means relationships across the institution and outside of the institution. So the fact that there's a president doing lots of, and I know Lauren and I have talked about this, the development and relationship building, you got to do that inside your campus too. The president has a presence inside. So you've got all these tensions. The other side, though, inside, it's just like fundraising. You know, you can't be doing that, and you don't want to be down solving issues in student services and things, but you cannot deny a presence on the campus either as you think about development work. And so it's development in the biggest possible broad sense, presence on the campus, presence outside the campus, and like Lauren and we talk about this again, it's always the story, it's always the mission, always, always, always. And it's never about you.
I'd just add, you know, being in an interesting role as a development staff person and then also the spouse of the president and knowing both Tom and Lauren, I would say that, you know, I don't know how you quantify this in terms of time, but one of the most important things that the president can do is be the chief storyteller. And that story comes from the stories inside, the stories of the student and the faculty experiences, the things that are going on, being able to tell those stories in a broader context with donors and community, and then also taking those stories from donors and community and linking them back to campus and providing appropriate forums to keep telling the stories. And Eric, that's for you, the great storyteller. Eric, we had a conversation just this morning about the power of stories. And I think that's really a very important part of this whole culture of philanthropy because we're hardwired as people for story.
And Jeff, the final currency here is trust. Yeah. People will never support in any way, whether it's time, talents, whatever, or money, someplace or someone they do not trust. So it isn't going to happen. And Lauren, if I can speak you for a little bit, I was in conversation with somebody earlier that's talking about retiring as a president. And you get so engaged in this, so much a part of you that you have to leave time for after you retire for a grieving process. Believe it or not, that's the test to know how engaged somebody is because I never wanted to be president of any place else. And when you're done, it's you're so invested in what happens. There has to be time for that too.
What about the age in which we reside now, where probably the biggest challenge, at least at places like Concordia St. Paul, was that you had the more traditional donor base that saw you as a Lutheran church work preparatory institution. And then you had newer people who saw you more as a liberal arts college or something like that. But as we grow and we have graduate programs, we have more career prep programs, we're much more diverse in our identity. How do you continue to have that narrative that works without making it seem like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth?
Paul, all these institutions have gone through that, but it's a both and story, what Marianne talked about in the very beginning. I mean, engage them with students that are in DCE or pre-sem or whatever programs, because you're still doing that, and help them understand. One of the key things that was really important to me was those programs are key to the identity of the institution. You know, there's such an important part of that. You know, and for all of you that there's been yakking in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod about consolidating church work programs. And all the presidents have refused to do that because it's so important to the identity of the institution.
Yeah, I agree, Paul. It's a both and piece. It also comes back to, you can weigh on this too. It's being able to listen to your donors, right? Yeah. And finding out where the stories and the matches are. And, you know, the stories, even as our campuses grow, as we become more diverse, and Augsburg is a great example of this, how the story continues to unfold in new and surprising ways, but it is all connected to the mission of who they are. And they found wonderful ways of continuing to tell those stories with that focus. And I think that's part of the creativity of the institution. That's also when you can rely on the whole culture of the institution, staff and faculty to say, Augsburg may, and I hope that's okay, Sonia, that I take Augsburg as an example, but I'm over there every once in a while. I worked there long ago. I still can't believe the transformation of the place because I still have that connected feeling, but the stories are so incredibly wonderful and diverse, and it's a new take on the mission that I've been inspired by that as a part of that constituency. So I think it really encumbers our communities to tell the stories in some new ways.
Thanks for bragging about Augsburg. Paul, we spend a lot of time with prepositions. And I mean, you see it in Daryl's, the NECU document about flourishing. But we love the word because. Because of our Lutheran identity, we do blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And it's allowed, some vibrant stories. It doesn't mean that we don't have epic fails on that. And, it's hard. But we've actually spent quite a bit of time just on prepositions.
Well, I think, people give to a vision.
Yeah.
And the institution may be growing and developing and reaching out and doing all sorts of things that are not exactly at the heart of what the donor experienced or what the donor is interested in. But a donor that has a genuine connection to the mission of the place is proud that their institution is now doing new and different things. And indeed, I've found through the years that a challenge with a number of alums is that they think the place is still what it was when they were students, and they don't know what the place has grown up to become. And when they do see what it has become, they get very excited by it. And I think we have to keep that vision versus need piece, I guess, always in mind.
And that goes back, Jerry, to your question too about the change in the name. I'm sure that was a thoughtful process within, or I'm assuming it was a thoughtful process within your institution, that there was a rationale for it. And sometimes, as alums, you don't hear it. You just see that it happened. You can be grumpy that it happened, but it's a different thing when you have an understanding of what was involved in that. And, and to hear some students talk about it too. Wow, that's pretty powerful.
Hey, Paul, just in closing, it isn't easy, okay? I've been there with those, and it's not easy. But I think reinforcing the role of those programs in the institution and the fact that they exist helps.
Sometimes, in our cases, people get excited about change, but not the kind of excited you want. So it's a challenge.
Hey, Lauren and Marianne, we're going to run out of time on Zoom.
That happens too.
Great.
Yeah.
And if I can ask everybody again, remember, I'm going to send an email to remind you, call Oak Ridge now, and questions for Daryl. And you'll get an email tonight to remind you about that. Everybody take care.
See you on May 31.
And you're going to send out the schedule again, right?
Right here, it's right there with that same email,
Great.
but it's not coming out till tonight. I won't get to it.
Great. Thank you.
You bet. See you. Bye.
Okay, thanks. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.